Chapter 1. In the early 2010s, and then especially throughout 2013, observers of digital culture began to read more and more about a new form of digital payment called Bitcoin. Although any number of digital payment systems had already emerged from relatively straightforward tools for money transfers, such as new Western Union services, online bill paying, and PayPal, to more exotic systems, such as a Liberty Reserve, beans, and forms of digital gold like Eagle. Bitcoin was said to be different. Its difference stemmed from at least two sources. First, that it was based on a relatively new form of cryptographic software technology called a blockchain. And second, that throughout 2013, Bitcoin had skyrocketed in its value relative to official world currencies like the US dollar. At the end of 2012, one could buy a single Bitcoin for around $13. By May 2013, that one Bitcoin was worth upward of $100, nearly an 800% gain for those fortunate enough to have held it for 5 months. And those who have were fortunate enough to have kept their secret phrase. Many have lost their bitcoins. These bitcoins may never be retrieved. Although I can imagine in some perhaps not too distant future, one bitcoin is going to be so valuable that it might be worth uh, excavating by way of secret passphrase recovery. That's a possibility. We go through great extents to excavate gold. Not just gold. It may not even be done for economic reasons. It may be done for archaeological reasons. Our grandkids and their robots may do it as a school project. In November and December of 2013, Bitcoin's value briefly exceeded $1,200. History of Bitcoin. In just under a year, investors who timed their buying and selling correctly could have made around 8,000% in profits, far exceeding the performance of most, perhaps even all, traditional investments. Those who had bought or mined Bitcoin earlier in its existence, the first coins were created in 2009 and started out as essentially worthless, could and well may have realized gains that dwarf even those. This remarkable performance thrust Bitcoin into the public eye, eventually attracting numerous startup projects, venture capitalists, and investors. By far, the majority of interest in Bitcoin came from technologists and those who follow and admire the work of technologists. To those of us who were watching Bitcoin with an eye toward politics and economics, though, something far more striking than Bitcoin's explosive rise in value became apparent. In the name of this new technology, extremist ideas were gaining far more traction than they previously had outside of the extremist literature to which they had largely been confined. Well, that's an interesting take. I hope the author is one such extremist. Otherwise, this is a very unfair characterization. If it's self effacing, it totally passes the mustard. But if it's a characterization of people who were the granddaddies of cryptocurrency, and positioning them as extremists can alternatively be taken as a compliment given the fact that the lunatics are running the media, politics, and the economy. The lunatic fringe is running politics, media, and economy. And so I suppose if we measure from the point of view of this lunatic fringe that we call mainstream, if we take it from that perspective, then I suppose crypto anarchists could be extremists of the best kind. I hope the author is not trying to paint any alternative picture to the two that I just stated. Dogma propagated almost exclusively by far-right groups like the Liberty League, the John Birch Society, the Militia Movement, and the Tea Party conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones and David Icke, and to a lesser extent, rightist outlets like the Fox Media Group and some right-wing politicians, was now being repeated by many who seemed not to know the origin of the ideas or the functions of those ideas in contemporary politics. That is very interesting. I don't know, most of these groups that he listed, but I am familiar with Alex Jones, and I am very familiar with David Icke. And of course, I know Fox Media by reputation, more or less. And so while Alex Jones is entirely a madman and quite possibly Bill Hicks trolling the universe, some of the stuff he's said over the years is coming true. And so here we are. David Icke, even more so. Okay, I'm watching you. David Golumbia, was it? Okay. These ideas are not simply heterodox or contrarian, they are pieces of a holistic worldview that has been deliberately developed and promulgated by right-wing ideologists, right-wing ideologues. To anyone aware of the history of right-wing thought in the United States and Europe, they are shockingly familiar that central banking such as that practiced by the US Federal Reserve is a deliberate plot to steal value from the people to whom it actually belongs. Well, I mean, that is a fact. Federal Reserve is today, and for many months up to now, and for God knows how many years, today Federal Reserve is printing $125 billion, and they're doing it every single day. Of course, printing is a turn of phrase. They're not printing. It's as quick as their machines and their fingers can enter numbers on a keyboard. That's how fast they're printing money. And I just myself invested in crypto, literally splitting my savings. Half in crypto, half in the bank. I fully expect the half that's in the bank to depreciate over the next year. If it lasts more than a year, I would be surprised pleasantly. and my crypto investment has already increased. Um, I don't want to talk numbers, but I'm not sure what what is untrue about this. I mean, my whole life I was told to save money, save money, save money, and I did. And now what? Now, 2,000. Now a loaf of bread is $2,000. Now what? How much money can you save when a loaf of bread is $2,000? Right? So central banking, such as that practiced by the U.S. Federal Reserve, is in fact a method that steals value from the people to whom it actually belongs. Well, I don't know about to whom it actually belongs. It belongs to the bankers. It doesn't belong to me, Federal Reserve. And then a deliberate plot sounds conspiratorial, but let's not forget that conspiracy theories or conspiracy theorist is a invention of the CIA in the 50s when they were trying to discredit people that were saying that CIA was involved in various plots to overthrow foreign governments, etc. All turned out to be true, but their PR team went hard at work and came up with conspiracy theorists in order to discredit anyone who says anything that's outside the mainstream lunatic fringe that controls the media, economy, and politics. That the world monetary system is on the verge of imminent collapse due to central banking policies. That's happening right now. When was this book published? Okay. Really? Huh. Nowhere does it say when it was published. Weird. Well, in any case, we're going through the collapse of central banking policies right now. So these weird right wing people seem to have gotten it right, especially fractional reserve banking, that hard currencies such as gold provide meaningful protection against that purported collapse. Oh, okay. Currencies such as gold provide meaningful. Wait, especially fractional reserve banking. Oh, okay. Gotcha. That's a continuation of the previous statement. That the world monetary system is on the verge of imminent collapse due to central banking policy, especially fractional reserve banking. Well, yeah, that's happening. Next statement: that hard currencies such as gold provide meaningful protection against the purported collapse. Well, what can we say about gold? Um, it can't be owned by the people because anyone with a gun can take it, especially governments, historically speaking, right? You can't take it with you. Um, if if you're buying gold online that's stored someplace else, and you're not Warren Buffett, um, a guy that can charter a private jet and fly with a private security team to where his gold is located, and then transport it en masse with, you know what I mean? Um, Gold is difficult. Uh, unless you're buying it on a computer, right? At which point you might as well just buy it, buy Bitcoin. Why not? It's, you're relying on electricity to access both gold and Bitcoin at that point, and Bitcoin being natively digital just makes more sense to buy. Plus, it's finite. Um, and people say that gold isn't. That Elon Musk is going to rain gold from the skies upon all our faces. Be that as it may. That inflation is a plot to steal money from the masses and hand it over to a shadowy cabal of elites who operate behind the scenes. Okay? And more generally, that the government and corporate leaders and wealthy individuals we all know are controlled by those same elites. I have to go to George Carlin as the supreme authority on this one. He's made jokes about this, that two people are not who are both in power and trying to remain in power are not going to collude to stay in power, and that's somehow hard to imagine or impossible to happen. That's ridiculous. Of course it happened. um, Friendships are conspiracies between people, you know uh, just use different words. And more generally, that the governmental and corporate leaders and wealthy individuals we all know are controlled by those same elites. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Hence the pedogate, right? Understanding how Bitcoin comes to embody these extremist ideas, that's again unfair characterization. Extremist ideas seems pretty centrist to me. It's like, let's be reasonable about this. But in any case, requires situating it within two broader analytical frameworks. The first of these is the phenomenon that scholars call cyber-libertarianism. I see. Cyber-libertarianism. All right. This That's so unnecessary. You just call it libertarianism. Okay. The central texts describing cyber libertarianism are Barbrook and Cameron, and Winner. For more recent accounts, see Turner, as well as Columbia. Okay. Would it happen to be David Columbia? In its most basic and limited form, cyber libertarianism is sometimes summarized as the principle that governments should not regulate the Internet. This belief was articulated with particular force in the 1996 Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, written by the libertarian activist, Grateful Dead lyricist, and Electronic Frontier Foundation founder. EFF is a leading digital rights and technology industry advocacy organization, John Perry Barlow, which declared that governments of the industrial world are not welcome in and have no sovereignty over the digital realm. Well, I appreciate the sentiment, but here we are, 20 years later. An FBI book is owned by the CIA. And government is shutting down various social media sites that kids are playing on. It's a madhouse here in 2021. In practice, opposition to government regulation on the internet is best understood as a core and in important ways vague tenet around which circulate greater and greater claims for the freedom created by digital technology. Why wouldn't what I mean? Why wouldn't you? Would you circulate greater and greater claims of ownership, being owned? You would. Yeah, we are. Yeah. There's no freedom online. We are tracked. They know our IP address, they know where we live. Each and every individual packet is recorded through intrusion detection and protection systems and firewalls. Quality of service is metering, aka QoS, is metering our data velocity up and down. And it's a kind of a technocratic dystopia, all in all. So for all of its circulated greater and greater claims for the freedom created by the digital technology, I have to report that we have received nothing but chains here in the future. At its most expansive, cyber libertarianism can be thought of as something like a belief according to which freedom will emerge inherently from the increased development of digital technology. That's utter nonsense. Um, Greater degree of ownership will emerge inherently from the increased development of digital technology. Look at the pattern, look at the trend. Okay. Um, Digital screens are a kind of a ball and chain. People got along just fine before computers. So this is wishful thinking or inaccurate rephrasing by David Golumbia, and therefore entails that efforts to interface with or regulate that development must be antithetical to freedom, although what freedom means in this context is much less clear than it may seem. That's because you're trying to define it, David Columbia. Freedom means not having to define it. As Winner puts it, to be cyber libertarian is to believe that the dynamism of digital technology is our true destiny. There is no time to pause, reflect, or ask for more influence in shaping these developments. Well, that's ill advised. In the writings of cyber libertarianism, those able to rise to the challenge are the champions of the coming millennium. The rest are fated to languish in the dust. This is a very nice narrative if somebody wants to enslave you through technology. This is exactly the kind of narrative that you would push. Here, come into the digital realm. Here's where the freedom lies. Oh, gotcha! Cyber libertarianism is thus not to be understood as the belief system of someone who overtly describes themselves as a political libertarian, a member of a libertarian party, or someone who voted for libertarian candidates, okay, and who supports or promotes the development of digital technology. Someone who fits this description would likely have cyber libertarian beliefs, of course. And a few pundits associated with Koch brothers funded Mercatus Center to explicitly embrace the label. But the analyst of cyber libertarianism is getting at something subtler. The way that a set of slogans and beliefs associated with the spread of digital technology incorporate critical parts of a right wing worldview, even as they manifest a surface rhetorical commitment to values that do not immediately appear to come from the right. What the fuck? Ugh. But the analysis of cyber-libertarianism is getting at something subtler. The way that a set of slogans and beliefs associated with the spread of digital technology incorporate critical parts of a right-wing worldview, even as they manifest a surface rhetorical commitment to values that do not immediately appear to come from the right. That's a mouthful. Okay, what David Golombier is saying here, I've found a finer point. And that point appears to be something like the right wing has Trojan horsed their beliefs inside the technology. Certainly, many leaders in the digital technology industries and quite a few leaders who do not work for corporations openly declare their adherence to libertarian or other right wing ideologies. So what? That's so weird. America used to prosecute communists. Now everyone's a communist. It's like, let people be, man. Like it matters, right? There's no democracy, tyranny, uh, uh, monarchy. These are just stitchings of a social fabric. But that social fabric is the same everywhere. Just to break, I am not a believer in left wing, right wing ideologies or ideologies of any sort. In fact, freeing oneself from ideologies is a kind of freedom, probably the best kind you can find for free, anyways. Just a brief list of these includes figures like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Eric Raymond, Jimmy Wales, Eric Schmidt, Travis Kalanick. All right. Furthermore, the number of leaders who demur from such political points of view is small, and their demurrals are often shallow. But the group of people whose beliefs deserve to be labeled cyber libertarianism is much larger than this. The core tenet, I get it. It's politics of Bitcoin, but man, this is it's David. It's coming off real bias here. The core tenet of cyber, the insistence the government should not regulate the internet, appears to be compatible with a wide range of political viewpoints. As EFF senior global policy analyst Jeremy Malcolm has written, even politically progressive activists are inclined to be more distrustful of governmental intervention online than offline in expression of internet exceptionalism. Right. Yeah, of course. As Winner makes clear in his 97 paper, the critical point about cyber libertarianism, and I firmly believe that this phrase has never caught anyone's ear. Shorten it. Cyber libertarianism? Come on, man. Scilib. There we go. As a belief system is that it links static enthusiasm for electronically mediated forms of living with radical right wing libertarian ideas about the proper definition of freedom, social life, economics, and politics. His emphasis on proper definition is the key to Winner's analysis. People who subscribe to Scilib for the most part, do not describe themselves as scilibs and may not call themselves libertarians or even identify with right-wing political parties. Instead, and at least sometimes without explicit knowing, they accept definitions of certain fundamental terms that come from the political right, especially when digital technologies are at issue. Everyone does that, David. I just did it. Everyone does it all the time. You do it. You've been doing it for several pages now. All right, let's see where you're going with this. The most important of these redefined terms that occur repeatedly in discussions of Bitcoin are freedom and government, both of which are central to all scilib and political libertarian rhetoric. Referring to the 94 Manifesto, Cyberspace and the American Dream, a Magna Carta for the Knowledge Age, by Esther Dyson, George Gilder, George Kayworth, and Alvin Toffler Winner. Writes, characteristic of this way of thinking is a tendency to conflate the activities of freedom-seeking individuals with the operations of enormous profit-seeking business firms. Of this way is tendency to conflate the activities of freedom-seeking individuals with the operations. Conflate. In other words, they should be held to a different standard. Okay. In the Magna Carta for the Knowledge Age, concepts of rights, freedoms, access, and ownership justified as appropriate to individuals are marshaled to support the machinations of enormous transnational firms. We must recognize the manifesto argues that government does not own cyberspace, the people do. That's not true. That's never been true. One might read this as a suggestion that cyberspace is a commons in which people have shared rights and responsibilities, but that is definitely not where the writers carry their reasoning. Well, I don't know. This is several layers of inception here. But if you're pulling this thing to argue, government does not own cyberspace, the people do. Perhaps it is meant governments ought not own cyberspace. People ought. That's accurate. Governments ought not own cyberspace. The people ought. However, the reality is that the cyberspace was developed, commissioned by the DoD, Department of Defense, a governmental agency. They commissioned ARPA, Advanced Research Project Agency, back in 1969 to build a sturdy protocol capable of withstanding partial destruction, I believe, is the exact quote from the proposal. And TCP/IP was developed, upon which HTTP was built, and then everything else that we see today. So I fear that David may be going to a straw man route here, but let's see. The freedom these writers advocate turns out, in a way they themselves do not always acknowledge, to be identical with the use of free in the phrase free market. Ugh, I hate when people bring this stuff up. It's like nobody knows what the hell anybody else is talking about. Okay. Free as in free market, not as in beer, not as free beer, not as liberty. Shut up. That is free from government regulation. Yeah, but again, it's never been true. From day one, it's never been true. Never been true. Ought be true, never been true. Never will be true. I hope I'm wrong about that. As long as there's government, there will be attempts to control large masses of people. And controlling large masses of people by way of TV is what governments have been doing for decades. And TV, in this sense, is no different than a computer screen. They are one and the same. When you're on your computer screen or your TV, the government knows where you are. They know where you live. They see the electricity. They know your IP is active. The packets are being sent back and forth. They know the channel 4 is on, whatever it is. They know where you are. So all of these are, in fact, control mechanisms by design. And the political rhetoric that's sprinkled on top sounds like, to me, everyone's full of shit so far. But let's keep going. Building on the fundamental, often unspoken rightist beliefs about the uniquely oppressive nature of governmental power, I mean, is that not true? Governments do have a uniquely oppressive nature. Social fabric does in general. Terence McKenna said, whenever there's two people in a room, there's a third person, and it's called society. Or something probably more eloquent than that. But you get the gist. Okay. They advocate greater concentration of power over the conduits of information, which they are confident will create the abundance of cheap, socially available bandwidth. Today, developments of this kind are visible in the corporate mergers that have produced a tremendous concentration of control over not only the conduits of cyberspace, but the content it carries. Well, yeah. But he means having the ability to block an entire country, conduits of cyberspace, but the content as well, meaning Trump can block TikTok, right? Content it carries. We can block China using autonomous system numbers, AS numbers. AS numbers are identifiers that are given to large swaths of networks. And each of those networks inside an autonomous system has many nodes. A node such as a computer or IPTV, anything IP, right? Or your phone, anything like that. So inside a singular autonomous system, there could be thousands, hundreds of thousands of nodes, millions, perhaps. A small country may have one autonomous system number, and internet service providers in the United States can receive a message from the government saying, block this AS number. And the internet service providers in the United States have no option but to comply. So, I'm not sure what's happening here in this text so far. Best I can tell, David Golumbia is being facetious. I can't tell if he's being sincere, because if he's being sincere, this is shitty writing. They advocate greater concentration of power over the conduits of information, which they are confident will create an abundance of cheap, socially available bandwidth. This kind of today, developments of this kind are visible in the corporate mergers that have produced a tremendous concentration of control over not only the conduits of cyberspace, but the content it carries. Oh, he's referring to corporate mergers, which is fine. Um, same people that control the government control the corporations. So it's not like those imaginary boundaries are going to stop them from implementing their plan. It wouldn't stop me. From a Scilib perspective, all governments, not simply whatever current bad government we describe as doing wrong, exist only to curtail the freedom that is inherently negative, in the classic sense of negative versus positive freedoms developed in Berlin. To be free simply is to be free from government. I would be hard pressed to find a rational person that will here's the thing, you can't even argue freedom from government. We don't have that option in our society. Where is that option? That option doesn't exist. All land in the United States has been mapped and owned. You can't set up shop in a national park. You can perhaps go into remote wilderness, hope nobody will find you. But is that really an option for a softie that was born and raised in this system? Do we really have another option? No, I don't think we do. These alternatives that make us somehow completely free from the government are imaginary, idealistic. You know, no one's trying to kill me right now, and in large part, that's probably due to the law and order established by the government. I would love for that not to be the case. I would love for us all for us to be good little bunnies and get along. I don't know how tenable that is, and under what types of pressures and circumstances will it withstand, you know, that sort of a sweet equilibrium. Yet, in most non-rightist political theory, governments exist in no small part to promote human freedom. Yet, in most non-rightist political, so leftist political theories, governments exist in no small part to promote. Right. That's the narrative. We have to separate the narrative from practice. Promoting human freedom leads to change. If history books have any credibility, they don't for me, but for you they might. So, Marxism killed a whole lot of people, just like any other ism, capitalism included. What the right advocates is individual freedom and responsibility, right? Well, let's boil it down to an ism, individualism, right? And Marxist political theory is collectivism, groupism, tribalism. This is a meaningful dichotomy. These are the two meaningful lenses through which to view these two opposing governmental systems. They're both shit, frankly. Their advocates make it sound like, and may often believe that, Scilib commitments are about limiting power, but this is only true so long as we construe government as equivalent with power and the internet as being oppositional to power. rather than, at least in significant part, being strongly aligned with it. Okay. The most direct way to arrive at this perspective is to accept the definition of government developed by the far right, especially anarcho-capitalist theorists like Murray Rothbard and David Friedman, and echoed by politicians like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. According to this view, government is inherently totalitarian and tyrannical. Society is inherently totalitarian and tyrannical. Society. Government and tyranny are essentially synonymous. Society and tyranny are essentially synonymous. Governments purport themselves to build societies. Ergo, government and tyranny are essentially synonyms. Of course, society is also the thing that's fun and nice and cool. Society is both of those things. Government is only one, right? Society can be fun and cool and chill, whatever, right? But government can't be fun, cool, and chill. Have you seen one? I've never seen one. Charlie Chaplin playing Hitler, sure. Borat, sorry, Sacha Baron Cohen playing a dictator in the movie of the same name. Yeah, fun, you know. But governments in real life, yeah. So government and tyranny are essentially synonyms. Yeah, that checks out. I don't think that large bodies, large entities, institutions, I don't think large institutions are moved by their credo, by their motif, by their narrative. They are moved by the individuals who are pursuing God knows what ends. And a large number of those individuals is unconscious. As they are called in the biz, NPCs. More or less embodying some sprite or another. There's so many bad sprites to choose from. I'm really struggling to think back to a time where a government was somehow less than tyrannical. I can't. Sorry, David Columbia. If you're about to make a case that government is not tyrannical, I'm all for it. Scilab doctrine did not develop in a vacuum. It fits into, and at best does nothing to resist, the profound rightward drift evident in so much of contemporary politics. This becomes clear when we examine the explicit political and economic doctrine and practice that is usually called libertarianism in the United States, here meaning the political movement that is explicitly advocated by right-wing partisan institutions such as the Cato Institute, the Heartland Foundation, the Mises Institute, and others, as well as astroturf movements like the Tea Party and political figures. Wow, this guy is steeped in political lingo. AstroTurf. Wow. And its connections with the less explicit doctrine analysis called neoliberalism. I was hoping for an engineer's approach to the politics of Bitcoin, I suppose. I was hoping for a layer of analysis above this one, or lower than this one, depending on your point of view. I was hoping that the structure would be laid out and the argument would be made for the structure, and then the structure would be backfilled by the characters, such as cyber liberalism and neoliberalism, etc. But okay, not everyone's an engineer. Both of these doctrines, or dogmas, stem, okay, from the writings of core right-wing thinkers such as Friedrich August von Hayek, Ludwig van Mises, Milton Friedman, Rothbard, and others, as well as their more recent followers. The most trenchant critic of this work, that's a subtle way of calling somebody unoriginal. The most trenchant critic, I suspect David is a lefty guy. He's about to rip into the right wing. I'm assuming that's where this narrative is going. I'd love to be surprised. The most trenchant critic of this work, on whose research my analysis relies in particular, is the economic historian and theorist Philip Mirowski, who's never let a serious crisis go to waste, remains the single most comprehensive account of what he calls the neoliberal thought collective and the nearly identical Mont Pelerin society, of which Hayek was the founding president. Wow. Bunch of nobodies. Mirowski, along with some of his colleagues, has explained with particular cogency how Hayek and others disseminated neoliberal doctrine from somewhat different angles. Writers like Chip Bartlett along with Matthew Lyons, Claire Connor, Sarah Diamond, Michael Perlman, Jill Lepore, and the writers in Flanders' edited volume give us thoroughly documented accounts of how those wider spheres of right-wing political thought and practice operate, distributed among actors whose overt adherence to MPS doctrine, if you remember that's Mont Pelerin society, doctrine can vary widely, though they tend to be found far more on the right than the left. Wow, that whole paragraph could have gone to the dogs. Our journalist Mark Ames explains how apparently disparate political interests, especially in the context of Silicon Valley, can be seen to work together. Yeah, because politics is not their level of analysis. They're not bound or divided by politics. Politics is like an app, right? They're operating at the phone level. They're operating at the greater level of analysis. They're looking down on politics and using politics, the currents of the political movements, in order to pursue their means, which may or may not be congruous with the actual bill that they're passing, let's say. Right? A Republican backing a distinctly Democratic bill, or a Democrat backing a distinctly Republican bill. But most of the time, it's as simple as a bribe. And that's how we've done it for hundreds of millions of years. The journalist Mark Ames explains how apparently disparate political interests, especially in reflecting on some surprising alliances between today's technology giants and the lobbying groups and of the world's major extractive resource companies. Ames writes that even if we still give Google and Facebook the benefit of the doubt, and we do not, because now we know that they are the instruments of oppression, control, tyranny, governments, etc., and allow that their investments in the Cato Institute and the Competitive Enterprise Institute weren't directly motivated by killing. Obamacare and throwing millions of struggling Americans back into the ranks of the uninsured and prematurely dying nevertheless. They are accessories, and very consciously so. Big tech's larger political goals are in alignment with the old extraction industries, undermining the countervailing power of government and public politics to weaken its ability to impede their growing dominance over their portions of the economy and to tax their obscene stores of cash. Google, like Facebook, like Koch Industries, wants a government that's strong enough to enforce its dominant private power over the economy and citizens and protect its wealth, but too broken and too alienated from the public to adequately represent the public interest against their domineering monopolistic power. Well, that's playing out right before our eyes. All of you who remember the pandemic of 2020 know that all hell broke loose, and that's precisely the role that Google and Facebook, along with WHO, Apple, etc., locked people up into their homes, piped a narrow band of narrative into their skull brains, and the rest, as they say, is history. In this way, much right-wing discourse, even when it appears to be focused on issues that are not purely economic, turns out to work extremely well for the most concentrated sources of capital and power in our world. This is specious reasoning. We continue plowing through. Power is one of the central subjects for political analysis, and perhaps the central subject. Who is power? Who wants power? What the perspective those who have and want power are on the creation of the maintenance of methods for the management of power. Right, so if you recognize that, how can you regard one group as extremist and the other one what? Mainstream? Whoever has the power is the mainstream. That's just how it works. We might say that right-wing politics sides emotionally and practically with power. What do you mean? It identifies with power, and via this identification works to ensure that nobody interferes with the concentration and exercise of power. On this view, left-wing politics is specifically focused on the limitation of power, on mechanisms for distributing power equitably, and on the excesses that almost inevitably emerge from when power is allowed to grow unchecked. There's a difference between what you say, left-wing politics is focused on limitation of power. Those are merely words. When this is put into action, left-wing politics, historically and presently, are showing themselves to be the most tyrannical of all. Whereas right-wing notion of power comes from a deeply grounded place. It's a physical place. We understand. Yes? Rather than a balance of power and regular elections to curb the inherent possibility of abuse of power, the cypherpunks and crypto-anarchists accept, often without appearing even to realize it, the far-right libertarian and anarcho-capitalist definition of government that extends from the German socialist theorist Max Weber, who famously and tendaciously defined the state as a monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Physical. To Ronald Reagan's inaugural address of 1981, in which he famously claimed that government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. In Why Government is the Problem, Milton Friedman, a key player in the creation of neoliberal economic doctrine, makes the same case at greater length. You know, political types throw these phrases like neoliberal economic doctrine as if everyone in the world understands what that means. And literally no one agrees on what neoliberal economic doctrine, what that phrase might actually mean. If you ask 100 people to write a paragraph on those three words, man, it would be a cacophony. Hemingway, you are not, dear sir. The clearest articulation of these views is found in the work of ARC, right-wing thinker and Cato Foundation co-founder Murray Rothbard. In an essay titled Enemy of the State, first published in 1974, the volume Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature, Rothbard abruptly dismisses with almost the entirety of political theory prior to Hayek, while taking Hayek even further than he was willing to go, at least in print. Arguably, the position Rothbard develops is among the furthest to the political right offered in Western discourse. Oh, I bet you it's not far enough. With the exception of those who explicitly identify with fascism. All right, we'll see. We must therefore emphasize that we are not the government. The government is not us. The government does not, in any accurate sense, represent the majority of the people. Yeah, that's true. With no supporting argument or analysis, Rothbard dismisses nearly all the political theory on which democratic rules are based. Even the monarchist Thomas Hobbes thought that the sovereign represented the people over whom he ruled in an abstract sense, and the entire theory of representative democracy. Right. Thomas Hobbes could have thought that a sovereign represents the people in some abstract sense. But the government does not, in any accurate sense, represent the people. This is factual. As a thinking person of some age and experience, with no particular ties to right, left, all of these characters are Greek to me. I don't know any of them. Milton Friedman, I've heard of. But that's all. I couldn't tell you which camp he belongs to even now. But the government is clearly not representative of people. It's not working for the people. Even, on their best days, good things that happen because of governments are more or less accidental. Every once in a while, a good Samaritan will help out an individual here and there. But by and large, governments pursue means that are not congruent with the wants of the people. And when there's a disparity in that, they chop up the districts. They call it gerrymandering. There's a political word for you. David Golumbia. They chop up the regions so that they can get the votes they want, so that they can go about the business of pursuing their interests, whatever those may be. So at the very best, individual players inside the governments are pursuing are either lazy or aggressively pursuing um, whatever ends uh, they want for themselves. Uh, in that middle ground of like good governmental individuals who on some days do some good things. That's a whew, man. If you're counting on that, you're in deep trouble. So okay, at their limit, a limit that is often surpassed in current cypherpunk and crypto-anarchist rhetoric and practice, those views suggest bizarrely that only government is capable of violence. Really? Really? Who makes that point? Governments are capable of certain systemic mass violence. Who who is not capable of violence? This I am losing patience with you, David. And that even when private institutions and enterprises engage in what appears to be physical violence, it is in some sense of a different order than that practiced by governments. Yes, it is. That's what I just said. Governments are capable of instituting systemic violence. Even more bizarrely, uh, like the left wing calls it racism. Like, are we not on the same page? What is going on? Even more bizarrely, these views entail that democratic government lies about the one thing that does, in fact, distinguish it from other forms of power. Well, I don't know what he's about to say, but I want to address this part. All governments lies. All governments lie. Democratic doesn't matter. All governments lie. House MD. All people lie. All people lie. All governments lie. Everybody lies all the time. The assumption that we are capable of telling the truth is inaccurate. You are not capable of telling the truth. None of you. Nobody is. No one. Even more bizarrely, these views entail that democratic government lies about the one thing that it does, in fact, distinguish it from other forms of power, that it is directly accountable for its action to the people from whom it draws its power, while simultaneously entailing that power derived from capital and markets is accountable to citizens. Wow. These are just words that create a narrative that paints a picture that allows people in power to go about their work of doing what it is that they want to do. Worse still, it suggests that this market-based form of accountability does not merely trump the electoral and legal accountability built into representative government, but also shields corporate forces from the political critique to which the right routinely subjects government. In other words, no matter how much power corporations take, their power can never be evil in the way that governmental power inherently is. No, this is a straw man argument. This is nonsense. Okay? Nobody is saying that corporations can't be evil. All right? In fact, distinguishing between corporations and governments is inaccurate, impractical, and unuseful. For all intents and purposes, corporations and governments are one and the same. There are certain keywords that move with a fair amount of ease between explicit right-wing discourse and more general political discussion, but that serve as rallying cries for right-wing political action. Two of the most prominent and most relevant to Bitcoin are tyranny and liberty. When the right wing uses them, oops. When the right wing uses them, these words are removed from their more general meanings and grafted onto holistic bodies of political thought so that it can sound reasonable to oppose Social Security or Medicare on the grounds that they offend liberty and constitute tyranny, despite the signal lack of substantive political thought that would make such assessment coherent. It's no accident that the right-wing ideologue and talk show host Mark Levin, no idea who that is, titles one of his best-selling books Liberty and Tyranny, a conservative manifesto, or that he misleadingly claims that the founders understood that the greatest threat to liberty is an all-powerful central government. Okay, well, I don't know what founders understood. Well, let's for a moment consider whether or not greatest threat to liberty is an all-powerful central government. Yeah, obviously. That's the technological dystopian landscape in which I live. Central government, one global government, controlling all of us. And none of us have an option to exit. So I don't see anything wrong with that. Greatest threat to liberty is an all-powerful central government. That checks out. How does that not check out? And that conservatism is the antidote to tyranny. Well, I don't know about that. How can conservatism is a kind of tyranny. It's akin to traditionalism. Unless, of course, conservatism is something akin to essentialism or minimalism. In which case I agree. Conservatism. If it's meant something like sustainability, being minded in that way, mindful in that way, then I agree with conservatism is an antidote to tyranny. But if by the word conservatism it is meant conservative, a person who is conservative, traditionally described as a conservative. Someone might offhand describe them as conservative, perhaps based on the way they dress or act, etc. If that's what's meant by it, then yeah, of course, that's not antidote to tyranny. That is how tyranny is made. But if we mean essentialism is an antidote to tyranny, then yes, absolutely, I agree with that. A tyranny that in the United States is best exemplified to Levin by social programs enacted under the New Deal, despite our abhorrence of real tyranny, then, the right wing uses the words liberty and tyranny to solicit and activate populist energy against exactly those democratically enacted structures and programs among whose main purpose is to curtail the tyrannical abuse of individual liberty by concentrated economic power. Poddington describes this dynamic with regard to uses of the word tyranny by the Tea Party. Wow. So, I mean, talk about glossing over something, bro. Jesus, you can't do that. Can't say somebody else made an example about it, so I won't bother. Okay. The effect is to make such concentration of power even more possible and even less subject to oversight. And this is very much the direction in which Bitcoin heads. I that whole paragraph was just hard to get through. There's no meat in there. It's just a name dropping. There are many things worth saying about Bitcoin, finally. This short book is concerned not with providing a thorough description of the technology, a detailed history of its uses, an account of the scandals and triumphs associated with it, or profits of the various personalities involved in its creation and subsequent use, for which good introductory resources include Lancaster, Murray, okay, whatever. Its goal is more limited, to show how much of the economic and political thought on which Bitcoin is based emerges directly from the ideas that travel the gamut from the sometime extreme Chicago school economics of Milton Friedman to the explicit extremism of Federal Reserve conspiracy theorists. While it is beyond doubt that many who believe in Bitcoin think they do not subscribe to these theories, it frequently turns out that they rely on assumptions and concepts that do emerge from the far right. Yeah, everyone relies on assumptions and concepts that emerge from both far right and far left. If you want to go example for example, we can do that. As they are currently configured, Bitcoin and the blockchain technology on which it rests satisfy needs that make sense only in the context of right-wing politics. Are you serious? Bitcoin and the blockchain technology on which it rests satisfies needs that make sense only in the context of right-wing politics. As an engineer, I take deep issue with this. But I'll hold my tongue for now. Those of us who do not share those politics must therefore view Bitcoin and the blockchain with both skepticism and a clear eye for the political terms and concepts invoked in the discourse surrounding them. What? Okay. Those of us who do not share these politics must therefore view stock market and the New York Stock Exchange with both skepticism and a clear eye for the political terms and concepts invoked in the discourse surrounding them. You can literally put anything here. Those of us who do not share those politics must therefore view School Board of Education and its president with both skepticism and a clear eye for the political terms and concepts invoked in the discourse surrounding it. You see what I mean? If you can inject any substitution here and the statement is still true, then why bother making it? Unless, of course, you are forcing a versus scenario, a dichotomy, which appears to be the case. Right versus left. The real problem with right versus left is that on the left is led by women, and they are not engineers. On the right, it's led by men, and they are engineers. And the right is rigorous when it comes to their thinking, whereas left is communal when it comes to their thinking. This seems to be the case, best I can tell, as an impartial party that doesn't belong to any of these categories. You might say, but you are a man and probably an engineer. But you're probably saying that if you're left leaning, in which case I'm not. I'm sometimes asked to account for Bitcoin enthusiasm among those with explicitly left-wing politics. I'm sometimes to account for Bitcoin. Okay, my response is to ask two questions analytically prior to this one. First, to ask for accounts of where and how it happened that a technology developed specifically to magnify the powers favored by the political right has mutated so as not to serve those power but the forces they oppose. Well, yeah, but that was never the case. Like, yes, Bitcoin, blockchain, it's serving government powers. Absolutely, no doubt about it. But that's never been not the case. And second, to ask for accounts on economic and political economic grounds that proceed from left-wing thought, whether Marxian or Keynesian, to the need for an utility of Bitcoin. Almost uniformly responsive to those queries would be some of the rightist tropes about central banking, okay, and the government tyranny I describe here. And those that do not emerge very skeptical about Bitcoin. Perhaps Bitcoin and the blockchain can serve politics other than the ones from which they were birthed and which they continue to embody. My goal here is to document those politics and to show what any non-rightist politics of Bitcoin needs to overcome. So this is definitely a versus, right versus left. That's disappointing. That's deeply disappointing. I was really hoping for a book that doesn't take sides. I was really hoping for a solid structure that lays out the categories and connects them in a way that can be filled with any characters. Bitcoin, blockchain, left, right, it doesn't matter. I don't think I'm going to get that. I don't think you're going to get that. So the next section is, see, central banking, inflation, right-wing extremism, an overview of Bitcoin, central banking conspiracy theories, software as political program, the future of Bitcoin and the blockchain. Well, listen, I'm going to leave it here. Maybe I'll return to it. Maybe I won't. If you leave a comment and want me to keep reading, it's more likely that I will return to it. But for now, I've been deeply disappointed by this book. The specious reasoning, the references that are thrown about, the fervor with which the side is taken, the phraseology that's being thrown about, it hurts my brain. I find it intellectually dishonest and insulting. I am, however, very tickled by chapter 4. I am tickled by this. Well, in any case, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did.